Speak to the Human is a podcast that explores how we build connections with people in their professional work. It's about the human experience at work and about how to foster that connection and belonging to support people and their organisations to flourish. I'm your host, Sarah Abramson, and I'm looking forward to you joining me in hearing from our brilliant guests. In this episode, I talk with Eleanor Gooding, People and Culture Director at Boost Drinks. We're tackling the topic of redundancies and how to do them well by keeping humans at the heart of everything. It's, of course, a tricky and emotional topic, and that means it's often one that people avoid talking or even thinking about very much. We start off by talking through the amazing work Eleanor did in developing a positive culture at Boost Drinks, including implementing a People Manifesto. And then we move on to the more recent story of the company being bought out and going through job losses. And she explains how that foundational work on culture became so vital for supporting people through the change. Obviously, going through redundancies is incredibly difficult, both for people being made redundant, but also for leaders and managers. So how can you think about approaching the whole process in a way that is sympathetic, considered and supportive, and leads to better outcomes on both sides? I found this conversation really insightful and valuable, and I'm sure you will too. As always, please do drop me a line with any suggestions for future guests. Hi Eleanor, thanks for joining us on Speak to the Human. So you and I met back in the summer at our in-person event in Cambridge, Speak to the Human, where you joined our speaker lineup. And I know you had a real impact on people in the room. You provided lots of thought-provoking ideas and a really interesting structured approach to how to build and nurture a really positive organisational culture, as well as sharing some very meaningful personal input, which I know we all really appreciated. And since then, things have changed substantially for you, and that will give us kind of the main thread of our conversation today. But before we get into that, it'd be great to have a bit of background about you and the roles that you've worked in.
Hi, thanks for having me here today. And I absolutely loved speaking at the event in June, and I really enjoyed the other speakers that you had there as well. It was such a positive day, so I'm really chuffed to be asked to be on this podcast.
Oh, that's fab.
It was a really great event. So a little bit about me. I will try and keep this as a concise, somewhat linear history. I actually left school with the idea in my head that I was going to be an artist, and I took a foundation in art, and then I got sucked into a bit of travelling. One thing led to another. I don't really think I was the right fit at the time for education, and I ended up moving to Canada, and I went to art college there for a bit and started working in retail. And then I kind of spent years flitting back and forth between Canada and the UK. And all that time I worked in retail, and I did move quite quickly into management, managing quite big teams at sometimes. And it was really good actually, because I kind of cut my teeth on the front line of people management, and I think that's been really, really important to my whole career. And I've never forgotten what it's like to be, in front of customers on the front row.
So important.
Yeah, so it was really good, and I worked for some big brands at the time that did really good training programs, and I just started leaning towards training and development. And then I got an opportunity in one of the companies that I worked for to train everybody in customer service, which I made up the training, and it went really well. And then I kind of buddied up with my manager and managed a cultural change in that whole business. And I kind of look back at that and say, well, I don't know if I was equipped to be doing that at the time, but it worked really well, and it really kind of gave me an opportunity to leapfrog my career over into HR, which is where I spent years. I worked in companies both in Canada and the UK, and I've worked in companies and also consulted with companies, most of them SMEs. So I ended up joining Boost Drinks in Leeds, which is a functional drinks company, in 2018. and I was the first people role. Obviously, they were doing people stuff before I joined, but they didn't have a dedicated role. So I've been there ever since in the people and culture director role.
Mm-hmm.
When I arrived at Boost, my mandate was that the leader, the owner, founder, Simon Gray, wanted to work on a cultural agenda. He was really bought into it, but didn't know what he could do or how to do that. So I came into a business that from the outside, it looked like, and I think it felt this way inside too, a place where people loved to work, where they were doing really fun things, where people got to make an impact in their role. But it was like many businesses, especially SMEs that grow organically, it was a place where the culture had grown kind of like a garden. And the culture just was what the culture was. So there were some kind of norms and things that went on there that were really healthy and vibrant and lovely, and other ones that probably meant that the company wasn't necessarily as efficient as it could be, or people didn't feel as empowered as they could, or we didn't have the mechanisms to deal with problems as well as we could, and so on. So I led the process of kind of defining a culture that we wanted to have to deliver on a long-term vision that Simon had for the business.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we worked on for several years. And I can't take credit for everything we did. I mean, to have a leader that was bought into that agenda in the first place was invaluable.
Yeah, I remember first meeting you. We met at a conference in Manchester
That's
last
right.
year, and you were with Simon. But I remember you talking about him. Actually, I think after he'd gone, but saying like how significant it is working with a leader who is open to change, open to input, for somebody that makes suggestions and they're received positively and willing to kind of give something a go, or and that kind of mindset, that kind of attitude gives you the opportunity to explore things, to try things out, even if you then backtrack on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, do you know what, that's such an important piece of the puzzle. And it's one of the things where, I do speak at a fair few events, and it's one of the things over the years that I get asked again and again, which is, how do you get your leader to buy into this? So if your leader's already bought in and knows what they don't know and is willing to be open and listen, that's where the magic can kind of happen, I think.
And it's been very interesting. So I heard you speaking at that conference in Manchester that I just mentioned, and then you did a version of that talk when you came to Cambridge as well. And you took a very, very sort of considered and quite structured approach to developing culture, which was fascinating to sort of see it broken down into those stages. Did you conceive that from the beginning, or is it kind of reflecting back on what you did?
I think it was somewhere in between. There were some things that I had done in the past that I knew I should do up front. And so one of the first things that we did really early on in my days there was to define what we wanted the culture to be like. And it's always got to be strategic. You always have to be saying, who is going to own this, and why are you doing it? What are you trying to achieve? So we did define the culture early on according to the vision that we had. So, if we want to achieve this vision of being the chosen brand in functional drinks or whatever we were playing around with as the vision at the time, if we were aiming for that, then what kind of culture would deliver on that? And we thought about that for a long time. It was a piece of work that took quite a long time to actually put in place to get right. And part of it was because we knew what we wanted to do with it. We knew we wanted to make it a piece of work that everybody could share and be part of and participate in, because if everybody was participating in it, we might actually achieve it. But it's an aspirational piece of work. The piece of work that you come up with, the description of what you want your culture to be like, is you have to be somewhat down the road to achieving it. Before you can roll it out to people, because otherwise they'll see it as such a far off thing that doesn't feel like something that they can relate to.
Yeah.
So we kind of had to wait for the right moment and figure out exactly what we wanted that to look like. But anyway, so once we had that created, it's something that the whole leadership team needs to buy into. and then you can start to roll it out into the company and say, okay, so if we want to be this place where people can thrive, where everybody adds value to the business, where everybody can be themselves genuinely on a day-to-day basis, where we can celebrate the good things and learn from the difficulties, these kinds of statements, you could probably write a list of things, okay, straight away to say, okay, well, if you want it to be a culture where people can thrive, what does that mean? And, if you want it to be somewhere where people can continuously learn, what do you have to put in place for that? And I think, so I'm very careful with my words, especially when they're written down. And I try to look at the implications of those and the opportunities in those from every angle. And yeah, so there were things like that we put in place. And another thing we did, although we did this further down the line, but I probably would do this the other way around if I was doing it all from scratch again, is we put in what we called the People Manifesto. We didn't love that name, but we couldn't think of a better one. Essentially, I had several pieces of my work that I was doing, like the culture definition, and we had our values in place already, and I was expanding that program. And I kept coming back to the fact that there was something in the background missing. And it was that I was making assumptions about what I wanted our philosophy or approach to be when it came to people decisions and what we were trying to do overall. So we did a piece of work that then sat behind everything else that we did, which said, these are what our beliefs are when it comes to our people. So an example of one of these might be, we believe that your employment should be a rewarding experience. We believe that being a high quality employer is worth the effort. Those kinds of things. And then, so the beliefs was the first part of that. The second part of that was, this is what we will pledge to you. So it will be, we'll strive to be the best employer that we can be. We will work with you on problems and challenges and treat you first and foremost as a human being. So it was things like that in that bit that we pledge. And then there's because it has to be a give and take, because we're not a charity. There was what we expect from you. We expect you to buy into our vision and help to deliver it,
Yep.
And it's things like that then you can come back to, and they're so useful in so many circumstances, because then everybody understands that. It's really transparent, and it helps you as a leader because you can use it to guide you during tricky situations. And it helps everybody in the team, because we've had people come to us who said, well, this is what our manifesto says, and this doesn't feel like what my experience is right now. And you have to dig deep. You have to really look in the mirror and go, yeah, do you know what? You're right. So maybe we should do things differently.
Yeah.
So that was really rewarding.
I think people really appreciate that kind of clarity. And sometimes clarity isn't there. It's absent, or things are just not clear enough. So having something that's that clearly spelt out and available to people to see, not just this kind of mysterious management philosophy that exists behind a door and you sort of second guessing, I think that's really, really valuable, and I think people appreciate it. I want to sort of slightly backtrack on the what you've said about the culture and developing the People Manifesto. It's really interesting. I'd like to sort of understand what your process was for doing it. Were you mainly working with Simon on that? Were you consulting with people in the business as well? Or were you sort of coming up with something that you were then going to test? And had you had a chance to draw on other examples that you'd seen? Or did you feel like, because I think it's actually unusual to be this explicit and clear, I think. But had you seen other examples, or were you sort of inventing something that you felt you wanted?
Yeah. Do you know what? I think it's a really good question, and I'll answer that in a second. You might need to prompt me, but I think you've just touched upon something that I don't want to lose in this, which is that importance of the clarity. And maybe it's a bit unusual to be that clear. And I honestly think the amount of times that I've probably done 5 talks in the last 2 years where I've talked about the culture definition, but especially the People Manifesto, when you can tell what people think by the questions they ask at the end of it, or the feedback that you get afterwards. I think it's scary to do that. especially for bigger organizations, I think
Mm.
they think, well, yeah, but if we say that, then we're going to have to do that. And what they don't realize is that those things exist anyway. You know, like we had assumptions. So if you looked at the leadership team within Boost, there were 6 of us for the majority of the time I've been in the company. We all had a range of interpretations. So there was a scale probably of our understanding of these things, but we were more or less in the same ballpark. But what we had to do there was to narrow it down and go, well, this is what we're actually going to put the stake in the ground and commit to. And if it was too scary or too specific, we had to make it a bit bigger and a bit more open so that it could encompass a variety of different situations.
Did you find that in itself? Sorry, this is slightly.
Yes,
Did you find that in itself a positive process to go through?
Absolutely.
To put your heads together?
Because you don't. I think sometimes we just don't realise these things are assumptions in the background, but of course they are. Yeah. You know, you are going to make big assumptions about what really matters to the business and how you want to go about things. And that exists in every business. And you know, one of the things is it's different in every business. Some businesses might be about literally making as much money as they can, as quickly as they can. And that's okay. That's a perfectly legitimate business approach. But in turn, there will probably be things that are assumptions in the background, like they might not be spending that much money on their people. And that might be okay. But what they might get in return for that is, you know, high turnover. So they need processes to be able to do that. But those things are all legitimate and they all exist. And so I, you know, one of the things you will have heard me talk about this probably twice is understand the nature of your business and be okay with it. The nature of your business is slow moving, really high quality, great. If it's really fast turnover, you know, prepping a business to sell or just quantity over quality, that's fine. But just understand it and then go, okay, well, what do we need to do to deliver that? How do we need to treat our people to deliver that? And I think for me, those assumptions will all exist in the background. And why wouldn't you go back and do that process?
I think that's so true. And we're in a very interesting position of working with lots of different companies at Action with the work that we do. And you absolutely have to tap into the culture that exists in different organisations, and it can be wildly different. That if you try to run a type of approach or campaign or make assumptions that are valid in one organisation and apply them to another, it's just not going to work as effectively. You really have to get into the skin of what are the values, what's the culture like here, what's going to sit well with people.
Exactly. And I do come from a background of best practices because the company I worked for before Boost was an HR ordered an HR certification, and I got to be really nosy and go around and look at what a lot of big brands in the UK were doing for their people, which is a brilliant job if you're nosy. But what I have absolutely seen over the years is that a best practice for one company is poison for another. And that, you know, so yes, it's great to have things that we know work in one situation, but they don't have to work in every situation, and that's okay. So
yeah, absolutely. So let me bring you back to that kind of idea of how you approached it and thought about a way to design, you know, how to develop the culture and the People Manifesto and what that looked like for you.
Yeah. I think that they were both pieces of work that were primarily done by myself, Simon, the CEO, and Kirsty Burks, who's the Boost non-exec director. And she'd also worked in Boost before she was non-exec director. And so she knew the company really well. But what we used were a combination of lots and lots of different things. So we are a company that, especially for an SME with quite a small headcount, really, we surveyed our people a lot, and we would often throw in extra questions. And we've surveyed them on what our values meant to them, on what tools they needed, what was working, what's not working. We've got them to work together in groups before about how to bring our vision to life. We've done so many pieces of work that were collaborative with the whole company, where we had a load of information. So I actually had quite a lot of things already there to go, we don't need to ask this again because we've already asked this, we already know this. And then there were places where we didn't know things, so we would often ask them. Or also there were times when we said, actually, it's okay for us as a leadership team to make this decision, because ultimately we're leading the company and we're responsible for the decisions.
Yeah.
So it was a combination of those things, but really nice collaborative pieces of work. But the really important thing was the leadership team had to be able to get behind it collectively. We had to. And secondly, it had to resonate with the actual whole business. So if we showed them something and they went, we either had to bring them round to say, yes, but this is why, or we had to say, we haven't got that right.
And how did you do that? How did you know what they thought?
We asked them. And it is that simple. Sometimes Boost has a really lovely culture where people can come forward with stuff, ask questions. We have suggestion box, which is an anonymous online thing that exists all the time, and there's a physical one that's also can be anonymous in the office too. I think, it's an SME with a headcount of about 35 because we outsourced our manufacturing. So quite a big, well-known UK brand for functional drinks, but quite a small headcount really. We just knew how people were feeling most of the time. And especially, through COVID years and stuff like that, we just did a lot of surveying, and we would apologise for that, but we'd say, look, we are doing things with these.
Do you think the same kind of thing could work in a larger organisation?
Yeah.
For listeners that, are in bigger organisations and really want to understand what people think, can that kind of approach still work? And how might you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that I talk about and the things I've done are scalable if there's a will to do it. I think the bigger the organisation, the more, I think, complex the piece of work gets. And I've seen companies that have done stuff like this. Not necessarily the exact things that I've been doing at Boost, but I've seen companies be really people-y on a large scale and get it right. And I think that I think you just have to think about it carefully, and you have to be realistic about what can be done and what can't be done. You can split it down and do it almost in departments, but you have to make sure those departments all link back into the same harmonized overall experience, because otherwise, you're going to get a push and a pull across companies where it's not consistent. But I think ultimately for me, it would come back to what's your approach that you're taking here. And we chose a Boost very early on. I did get hired as the head of HR, and we chose very quickly to change it to people and culture director, because we were genuinely believing that we were having a people and culture approach, not a traditional HR approach. And your traditional HR approach has tended to build from the bottom up and be quite a process driven function that kind of answers the needs and supports the needs of the business. And in a people and culture approach, I would say it tends to be quite a strategic down approach, where you're putting your people and your cultural management at the heart as part of your business strategy. And I think that's a subtle difference. And I've had this kind of debate with a couple of people in the past about, well, HR can be strategic too. But I do think there's a different approach if you're actually embedding your people and culture as a strategic priority for your leadership team, and therefore cascaded out through your business at whatever size that business is. You will get a different approach than if you are acting as a service function that is answering to business needs. And there's not one that's right or wrong. I'm just saying they're just different.
Yeah. No, it completely makes sense as a difference and a different way of thinking about them. So things have changed substantially for you over the last few months.
Yeah.
And we want to explore those topics together, and particularly talk about redundancies.
Yes.
And bearing in mind all of the things that you've talked about, and how I know you've said how much that foundational work has been crucial to the period that you've gone through. So it would be fantastic to hear about all of that.
Yeah.
Let's start with the story of what's happened over the last few months.
Yeah. Okay. So the context leading up to to this year was that we kind of felt like we really kind of got to where we wanted with the culture management. It was quite a few years' work. It makes it sound like it was really bad. It wasn't. It was good to start with, but it wasn't where we wanted it to be. But we got to a point where people loved coming to work. We felt like all of the behaviours in the business were acceptable or great. And what I mean is people could be and were aligned with our behaviours, our values, our vision. They understood that it was a give and take with the People Manifesto. They were trying to help be part of the culture and understood that they had their heads up at the parapet. They were responsible for their own role, delivering something that helped us as a business. So every single person was asked in their review, for instance, how do you help us achieve our vision? And they could say that, and they couldn't have said that years before. So we hit this lovely point, and it kind of peaked when we said, right, you know what, we're going to go for an accolade now. So we applied for the Times Best Companies to Work For, and we achieved that the first time which was brilliant. So that was kind of May, June 2023. Mm-hmm. And one thing that happened at the end of 2022 was that Simon actually sold the business. It was sold to an established company who's got a great reputation, and it was a business decision that I think it shook people up a bit, but it was all business as normal, business as usual. And so I think once everybody got past the initial surprise, people understood anybody in Simon's position would have done what he did. And yeah, so life continued really, really well. And then the beginning of 2024, mm-hmm. the company that bought us put a proposal on the table to integrate Boost Drinks into their drinks portfolio, which meant that our company was at risk and everybody's roles were at risk of redundancy. I do want to say that in anything I'm about to say, I don't ever want to question or be disrespectful in any way whatsoever to that decision, because do you know what, it's a business decision, and I don't think any business that would have bought Boost Drinks at some point wouldn't have looked and gone, well, there's synergies here, so there's too many to not do this. So just because it wasn't great for people at Boost doesn't mean it wasn't a savvy business decision, and I think I just want to make that clear. But yeah, so that was the proposal, and it was one of those things where I think with hindsight, people in the business said, well, I'm not surprised, but I am surprised at the same time. This is always something that maybe could happen, but we didn't expect it to actually happen. And so, you and I were chatting about this before before we started recording this podcast. The first thing that happened was I knew about this obviously before the team knew about it, and I had the same reaction that anybody who was really highly engaged with their job, who loved coming to work, who loved the team, who loved my job. I didn't feel like I was finished the things I wanted to do in the business. I had the same reaction that anybody would have in that situation, which was shock, fear, grief, anger, all of those things. I mean, absolutely. And I've shared this quite openly in the past that I am neurodivergent. I'm autistic and ADHD, and I'm not somebody who copes with uncertainty well at all. Mm-hmm. And I was suddenly facing uncertainty in a highly emotional situation that was going to result in loads and loads of people also experiencing these emotions and uncertainty. And yeah. I'll be honest, I started to crash really quickly because I just don't operate well in situations where I don't know what's going to happen. And also, I don't know if this is the way it happens, Sarah, but often what happens in situations of redundancy like this is that HR gets the news and has to go out there and do a lot of the legwork. And then when they've finished, then it happens to them at the end.
Right.
And I could read the proposal. I understood what the proposal was, and the proposal would result in our operating business closing. And so I knew that it applied to me. And so I very quickly realized, hey, I'm spinning out of control myself here, and I've got to lead this, and I've got to lead it positively and well. So I went to our mother company and said, please, can you sort this out for me first? Because if you want me to go out there and be able to do this, I need certainty and I need to know where I stand.
I think, like I said, when we were chatting before we started recording, it reminds me of the oxygen mask on an aeroplane.
Yeah,
it's that
absolutely.
moment where you realise if you look after yourself first, then you've got a better chance of being able to lead and manage through something that's going to be challenging. So the self-awareness that's taken at that point when everything's feeling overwhelming is really good.
Yeah. And it was important. And I think I've got something that's been going around in my head, which is, we as employers these days, we expect a lot from our people. We want them to engage. Like, every employer wants a situation where everybody in their team can engage with the business. But those are such easy words to say. And when you actually pull that apart, what does that mean? I mean, you're asking for people's time and their skills and their attention. You're asking for them to care. But I actually think that people don't say this, but people can properly fall in love and have an actual connection with their job, and it's not just their co-workers, it's the whole, they bought into the entire thing. And that's the situation that we were facing. That's what I felt, the way I felt, and that's why I knew I had to be in good shape to help other people through that.
That's so interesting. Yeah, and I suppose it really is true. It becomes a part of who you are, doesn't it? It's part of your identity. And when things are going well and you've thrown yourself into the job and you love your colleagues and you are really invested in the work you're trying to achieve, very difficult then to feel like you're somehow going to be severed from it. That's it's quite actually traumatic.
Yeah.
Aside from the kind of practical level of how am I going to carry on earning in a few months, it's actually, there's an identity thing attached to that too.
It's grief. I mean, I honestly think it's grief, and you go through the stages that you do of grief. I mean, I've already touched upon some of those, but and I think that this is where I felt that I wanted to talk to you about this today as the topic that was foremost on my mind, is because if we expect people to engage in this way and then we end up in a redundancy situation for whatever reason, then often it's just it's almost like the business will often kind of step back a bit, because you have an emotional situation where people have engaged and they're very human, but then you have to go through a process that has to be legally driven. You have to have certain stages and steps to it, and I'm not talking about those steps today, other than, I can give you a nutshell for what we had to go through. But then what happens is that whenever a conclusion is reached, or even during the process, it's like we suddenly step back, and it's like we suddenly behave in a different way, because there's this really awkward, uncomfortable, unhappy situation, and that's awkward and uncomfortable and unhappy to deal with. So, like when somebody dies and nobody says anything because they don't know what to say, or they say what they think they should say, and then they try and think, well, I've said that, so I'll just get on with it because they won't want me to talk about it. I feel that's what a lot of companies do, and I was absolutely determined not to do that.
So how did you approach it? How did you keep that human focus at the centre of what you were doing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, okay, there's a couple of things. So we had to get prepared, and our mother company was absolutely brilliant with that. We had a person who was supporting me in the background with here's our process, here's the materials, here's this, what do you need letters, you do this, and I had to do quite a lot of that work on my end to make it kind of boost light. But what I quickly realized is the what had to be done in that way, and those are things like, I'm not sure how familiar you are, but there's a proposal is put forward, then you have to have a period of consultation, and there could be the collective one there, and there's to's and fro's with that, and you have to elect reps, and it's quite a complex, very unboost like process, but it has to happen. Then you get into individual consultations, and then you come to conclusions. So that's the nutshell of the process. But the how we did that, I realised was, we can still be Boost-like in the way that we do that. And so, one of the things that you can do, for instance, was in these situations is that you can deliver that news to your direct reports and you can delegate it. So we could have got the other people, I could have got other people in the leadership team or our next level of management down, our controller level. I could get them to deliver these consultations with the people. But as a leadership team, we just felt that was wrong. That was not. So I was determined to get in front of as many people as I could myself personally. And our non-exec director, Kirsty, put her hand up and said, I'll do those with you. So we did the majority of them together. There was a few that we couldn't do just because they couldn't get the logistics to work out quite right. We tried to do everything face to face. And what the approach that Kirsty and I took was, we are going to deal with whatever comes through the door. And we're not going to make this about us. We're going to make this about them. We're going to make sure that they have as much or as little time as they want. We're going to ask them how they're feeling first and foremost all the time. We're going to, if they want to cry, they can cry. If they want to rage at us, they can rage at us. We're not going to try and make it better. I started to call this process, this approach, I started to call it looking it in the face. And I feel that what happens is a lot of companies don't want to look it in the face because it's scary or unhappy or all the things I said before. And I was absolutely determined I was going to look every single person in the eyes and say, yeah, this is absolute, can I swear?
Yes, you can.
This is shit. This is shit. We all love this. None of us want this to be happening, but it is happening. I'm not going to shy away from it being happening. If you don't agree with it, let's talk about that. If you're scared, let's talk about that.
It's so honest. It's so honest. And it's giving people the respect that it's acknowledging that it's difficult, it's emotional, it's horrible, actually. And it isn't something that you can just give somebody a form and a piece of paper and some information and then send them out of the door. It's actually, it's really, well, it's human.
Exactly. And it's like, and when they do go out the door, what do they need to do? Does that person need to go home? Because one person might need to go upstairs and work with everybody else. Somebody else might just want to put the head down and get on with it. Somebody else might need to go home. So it's kind of like, I did talk about this before in the talks you've seen me do, where our approach to a lot of decision making at Boost has been what I call the grey square. And there are parameters outside of which are unacceptable or not negotiable. But within that, we've got the leeway to make decisions. So we could do things like say, look, if you need to go home, go home. Okay, are there things we could do? Do you need to stop this right now? Do you need to come back later? Do you need to, so we've got that flexibility, and I think that helped a lot too.
How much of yourself did you bring to those conversations? Like because the way you've talked about them, they're very honest conversations, but you, especially in a small company, you must have been feeling emotional yourself when you're talking to people with everything you've been through that you care about, and you've got a relationship with them, and there's probably friendships in there too. And how much of that did you allow to show, and how much did you try to sort of stand back a bit? What was it like?
Do you know, I've always made a point of leading by example with being okay not to be okay. If we were asking people to, as part of our manifesto and cultural definitions, if we were saying we want people to be able to be their whole selves here, we have to be our whole selves. And so from day one, I've stood up and shared things that were going on in my life with people. As a group, collectively, I've set the tone for saying it's okay to not be okay. And I think that is really, really important. But I do think, if you're asking people to be their whole selves 1 minute, and then they come into a room and, you have to know who they are and understand it. And we've done I am answering your point, but what I want to say is, so for instance, we started some DEI work a few years ago, and off the back of that, there was someone in the team who identified that they had a disability, and they are quite a private person, and they very publicly within our company shared half an hour after the session ended, they shared about their disability, and they said it was a life-changing moment for them.
Wow.
And honestly, it's easily in my top 10 favourite moments ever as a professional. When I read this thing they shared with everybody, I cried, because I was just like,
Wow.
oh my God, we've changed that person's life. They've suddenly realized they've got a disability that they've been trying to not look in the face for a while, and not share, and couldn't feel proud about or anything. And it just flicked a switch for them. So when you're in a situation like this, where you're sharing, you're leading, you're saying you need to be able to be vulnerable, you have to, I think, walk the line really carefully, because you need to not lose that. You need to be open and vulnerable. You need to be able to say, yep, it's quite hard as well for me too, but it's not about me. But you have to realize that you've got people who might be really, really vulnerable coming through the door, and you're going to have to look after them. So I do think I gave a lot of myself. Again, I hope this isn't oversharing, but right before the I think it was it was right before the proposals were announced, my stepfather died.
Oh.
And that was one of those moments. I mean, that is a life moment that matters. And I think going through that, and then a week later finding myself standing next to Simon as he announced this proposal, and people in the room shocked and crying, and our hands shaking as we're holding the pieces of paper that we have to run through this legal jargon on. I'm there thinking, do you know what? I've got a bit of perspective, which is that the things that matter are people and life, and jobs, as attached emotionally as we get to the best ones. Jobs come and go. Business decisions happen. That is the world. So I kind of feel like I was in a really strange headspace going into the whole thing. And I did try to give enough of myself, but not too much, if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. It really does. I think also this is the moment. I mean, it's good to hear that about having the bigger perspective too. But also, this is the moment where, or any really challenging time when things get difficult, that's the moment where the work on values, or the work on DEI, or the work talking about culture, developing culture, engaging with people properly, that's where it reveals whether that has been done authentically, meaningfully, rather than, we're a company and we're putting out our values so it all looks good on the website, or we've got to have a DEI statement. Yeah. Have you done it really meaning it? And if you have, then you can draw on it for this. Yeah. I know you've talked about that a bit before. We chatted a bit before the event when you were going through thinking about this and planning it, and you were saying that the groundwork that you'd done in the culture and values was really helping you in those moments. You've talked about this a little bit, but are there other ways that you were able to draw on the values and culture work that you'd done in the conversations, and then in the rest of the kind of time that you had together before the company closed?
No, absolutely. I think that you've hit on a point. I think we knew we had done it well anyway. And I think that it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because when people genuinely feel like they've gone, oh, I can be myself in this job, and then they are facing losing that job, that's devastating. And for some people more than others. And we had a real range of feelings. There were some people who were like, yep, things like this happen. I'm fine. This has happened before. I'll be fine. And there were other people who literally couldn't see a future for themselves. So I think you do have to be very, very careful. But also, you're absolutely right. The strength of what we had permeated everything that happened next. So the group collective consultations, we had to elect reps, and that process, and then the work the reps did throughout the business, and they did do a counter proposal. And do you know what? We did, a third of the company have gone and joined the mother company. And there were some jobs initially, but there seemed to be more jobs after the counter proposal. The strength of those relationships, the strength of that work, I don't think we would have got through it. And I will tell the whole story, but I don't think we would have got through it all in as good shape as we did if we hadn't done all that work and been in as good shape as we went into it.
Amazing. Yeah.
So I think the really big thing that I kept coming back to was we are still Boost. And one of the absolute things that I've always done, which goes back to that grey square, is we don't know the answers. Let's work them out together. So I think that myself, Kirsty, Simon, the leadership team, I think we were feeling our way through a lot of these things. And I'd go, look, I know this, we have to do this bit legally, but what should we do in this situation? You know, and you're feeling your way through it and going, does this feel like the best decision? Because I don't think there's a clear black or white one here. So there was a lot of that.
It's very, very interesting sort of seeing some of the ways and hearing from you some of the ways that you have supported people.
Yes.
And helped them. And I've seen that you did LinkedIn posts that was a campaign that you did by Boost to say, what was the title of that campaign? That was come hire our people.
Yeah, come hire our team. So there's a couple of things there, and I think I probably should give a little bit more context as to what happened between there. So we went through all the consultations. The proposal was confirmed as going ahead. So everybody got paperwork done, and then we were asking people to work until the end of October, December, or even January. So this is a live process as we're speaking.
Right,
the bulk of the company has just either gone over to their new jobs, are owners, or they've left just. So I'm still employed by Boost at the moment, but by the end of the month I won't be. So that's where we got to. And what happened during all of that was we had to make decisions that I led, but I didn't make all the decisions on my own. We had to decide as a leadership team when to put our foot to the pedal to go, we still have to deliver this business year, and when to go, this is not the time to say these things and do these things. We need to give people that chance to go and do what they need to do. But we knew at some point we would get back to a point when we needed to say, okay, everybody knows what's going to happen to them now, and we need to decide to move on. And if you can't move on positively, you need to come and talk to us, because we will help you. And if you really, really can't, we'll need to make a different decision. But it's the time that we pull things back. So at that point, we launched what I branded it up and called it our At Our Best for the Rest campaign. And that was a program of the support. It had 3 elements. It had the support that we could offer people for the rest of the time they'd be employed. It had things to boost our culture so we could really enjoy and stay motivated for the time that we had for the rest of the time together, and also some socials as well. So those are the elements in it, and we launched that. It was really well received, and people were hurting and people still had these fears, and some people more than others, but people were ready to get on with it. And so one of the things that I was determined to do was to say, why do we have to leave people to go and find jobs on their own? Why can't we leverage our collective networks and try and help them? And why can't we have our people's backs on this? So offering references above and beyond what might be legally required, just helping people. And so we ran a campaign on LinkedIn where we would work with somebody to create a reference. From that reference, we would pull a little profile of them, and then our brand LinkedIn account would be like, right, today we're profiling, Emma, and then it would be like, here's what role Emma's looking for, here's a bit about her. If you want to get in touch, here's our LinkedIn, or if you want more information about this campaign, reach out.
I just think that's absolutely fantastic, because you didn't have to do any of that. And if you were being really hard-nosed about it, there's not a particular incentive for the company as an organisation to do that, and in an era where we've seen people getting sacked by text message and things like that, they're just absolutely terrible.
I know
that having that kind of depth of genuinely caring for people and going the extra mile to really meaningfully look after them, it says so much about you, I think, and about Simon as leaders, but also that you meant it with all the culture stuff that you talked about. And I just think it's fantastic. Did it change anything for you about how you thought about things? How did it sort of feel going through that process yourself?
Yeah, do you know what? I was quite nervous about the process, because I was wondering, because you're in this weird situation where you've been bought by another company and you're there are checks and balances that have to be met, but you're still a standalone unit. But, so I wasn't sure if what we could or couldn't do. And I just thought, well, I might just say, this is what we're going to do, and see if I got any pushback. And I didn't. All I got was the CEO of our mother company was like, I've never seen that done. That looks great. And I thought, okay, brilliant. So that appears that we have backing there. And I think Simon's got this phrase he uses. He's used it for years. If you say, right, I need to do this, I need some money for this piece of training or something, he'll ask his questions, and then at some point he'll say, why wouldn't we do it?
Right.
Why wouldn't we?
Love that question.
And I think more than anything else through this whole process, I've come out with why don't companies do this? We've had so many people get in touch and go, we absolutely love that campaign. Why aren't other companies doing it? And I don't know, because now we're doing it. It feels so obvious.
Yeah. But also so much better for you as leaders to come away from something that's been difficult. There's no getting away from it. It's really, really hard to go through something like this. But feeling like you can hold your head high and say, I did everything I could think of to make this better, more manageable, more in tune, more sympathetic, more supportive for the people I work with.
Yeah.
And I just think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, obviously there's going to be people listening who are, some of them maybe managing redundancies, some of them maybe not yet, but it perhaps is in their future that they're going to need to tackle this kind of thing. If you could distill down kind of 2 or 3 really key things for them to think about, what might those be?
Yeah, I would just say, if you're leading through a process like this, take the time to make sure you're in good shape for it. So if you need to sort out your own circumstances or get some kind of clarity about what's going to happen to you and when, I would push for that, first of all, because if it's the oxygen mask thing that you said, if you're not in good shape, you're not going to be able to lead this to the highest standards you possibly can. The second thing I would say is just look it in the face. Don't try and make it better, but don't ignore it either. I think the norm, Sarah, from what I know and what I've seen in all my years of working, I think the norm would be, even companies that are really compassionate and careful about what they do and really try and put people first, they often just neglect them. After that decision's been made, the person might be working a notice period, but they're just left to it. They're expected to come in and do their day job each day, and that is just crushing. And it doesn't have to be like that. You can check in with people regularly. You can see how they're doing. You can ask how their job hunt's going. You can ask, can I do anything for you? The amount of times I've gone around and said to people, even, this week, if you want anything else that I can do, you need to tell me now before I leave.
Yeah.
So I definitely do that. And I would just say collectively, as people practitioners, we need to do better. I think we can do more. This can be done on scale. It can be done with or without money. It's kindness and creativity and yeah.
I feel like there needs to be some sort of collective effort to share this experience, this learning, because I don't know, it's a level up. I don't know, it's decent and it's so much better. There's so much food for thought here, and I really appreciate you giving us that story and helping us to piece it together, think about it from that human point of view, but join the dots with the work that you did before all of that with culture and values. And I really hope that people listening are finding that as valuable as I'm finding it, as an insight into how things can be done.
Yeah. Can I? There's one thing I'd like to add here, which it's going into kind of a slightly uncomfortable territory, but we talked earlier about how we knew what people were feeling, and how we know, if we were getting things right. The last couple of bits that we did, we made sure that we tried to acknowledge and announce. So when people got roles, all the people who are going to the mother company, we tried to make a moment of that and say, all of these people have managed to secure roles, and we know that you might not have a role and you might be feeling really scared, but we still want to, put our hands together and cheer on our friends who have got jobs. And then each time, and this wasn't my idea, I don't know, but a bell appeared, and every time somebody who was leaving secured a job, the bell would get rung and everybody would start cheering and they go, who is it? Who is it? Who's got the job? And then, so we could celebrate that going through it. And the last day was Halloween. So we made the best day we could of it. We had lunch together. We did pumpkin painting. We came in costume for those who wanted to. We had a bit of a quiz. We tried to make it as good as we can. And we made a kind of yearbook for people. We printed up a kind of yearbook, and we had everybody's profile amazing in the back, and we had empty pages at the back. And the last couple of hours of the day was like the last day of school, and everybody was going around going, okay, who needs to sign L's? Who neach to sign, so-and-so?
That's so cool.
And we all got to write, I've loved working with you, all these things. And it was just such a lovely thing. And then we went home, and there were tears as people left. Then we had a really big party the next day and got really drunk. And that was great.
It speaks volumes that you were able to wind things up with something that felt like a celebration, given what everyone's been through.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to embarrass you. I think you had a special award that was sort of recognition of the work that you did.
This is what I was saying. It goes into uncomfortable ground. Is that we at our Christmas party every year, we always do a values award, and we have 5 values, and we would get people to anonymously nominate people for those values and say why. And then the person who got the most votes overall, or it would just become clear who the overall Boost Spirit winner was. So I opened this up and said, right, we're not going to be here till Christmas. Let's do this at our leaving party. I encouraged people to take part in it. And then 2 nights before, so I think it was maybe on the Tuesday, and last day was the Thursday, I was like, oh God, I haven't even opened this up. And I opened up and pulled all the results out. And my husband came in and saw me sitting, crying my eyes out, and was like, what's going on? What's happened? And I was just going, James, there's comment after comment after comment about me.
Oh.
And I'm going to cry now. I think as people practitioners, sometimes we don't know if we're getting it right or not. And we can get less feedback than other people, because I think we're the people who chase the feedback all the time.
Yeah.
And I did end up winning the Boost Spirit award. And, even though I knew that was coming then on a night, I when it got announced, I just thought, I'm going to start sobbing and I'm not going to stop. Because it goes back to your point about how much of yourself did you put into this. I think I realised at that moment quite a lot.
Yeah.
But I did think that this is one of the proudest moments of my career, being able to do this process as well as it could possibly be done. And yet it wasn't perfect, and it was an absolute shitty situation, but we did it as best as it could be done. And
Yeah. I was going to say congratulations, but it seems a bit trite. I mean, it seems like there ought to be a different kind of word that captures that. I mean, that's so...
Do you know what my mum said?
It's so well deserved, and the recognition of that from your colleagues in such a difficult situation is huge. No, go on. What did your mum say?
It either makes sense to you or not, but she just said, that'll do, pig.
I love it.
If you've seen the film Babe, you know what I'm talking about. So...
thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us and talk us through all of this. I think it's been just, wonderful, incredible to hear the story, and really, really valuable, and setting an example for how things should be thought about, for things that we should, all be really trying to get to grips with. But I want to ask a last question that I ask of all the interviewees on Speak to the Human. Speaking to you as a human, Elle, what's exciting you at the moment? I know that's an awkward question because you're about to change your work. But what are you looking forward to, and what's motivating you about the future?
Do you know, I have shared that I'm neurodivergent, and uncertainty is not good for me. And I don't know what I'm going to do next. I haven't looked for a job. I've got the opportunity to take a couple of months off, and I think I need that. I need to just decompress, because this year has been full on, personally and professionally. So first of all, I'm looking forward to getting some sleep. I'm looking forward to not doing anything. for a while. But one of my favorite values at Boost has been that there's opportunities in everything, and I think that that's the value that I got the most comments about in the awards, because I do think that we have gone through this and it's morphed into us going, this is a rubbish situation, but there is an opportunity for everybody in this somewhere. We've just got to help them find it, and it applies to me too. So I think that there's an element of me that says, right, yeah, I need to get a little bit of sleep, and I don't know whether I'm going to go and seek employment or whether I'm going to do consulting, because I've done that in the past as well. But I do feel quite excited about the future, and I'm having a word with myself on a daily basis to just say it's okay to have this uncertainty for now, because there's going to be something really good around the corner. And I when I really do think about it, now and then when I see a company that I go, oh, I'd love to get my teeth into that company. So I think for me it's very personal, and that's what's getting me excited, is to say there's going to be something exciting around the corner. I just don't know what it is yet.
Definitely. Well, I mean, that's brilliant, and I really wish you the very, very best with it. Thanks. And given hearing all the things that you talked about, I'm sure that whatever comes your way, you're going to make the most of, bring some fantastic thinking to. And I really want to find out what that is. I want to talk with you and keep in touch to find out what your next adventures are.
Absolutely. We can do the installment, The Adventures of Elle.
We should. Yeah, well, we should definitely. Yeah, we should follow up with another episode in the future and find out, where things have taken you and how you're going to tackle that next challenge. But thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate your time, and it's been wonderful to talk. So thanks so much. I hope everyone listening has benefited from this conversation as much as I have, and look forward to you tuning into future episodes. Bye for now.